Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking a little bit about fabrication in Revizto and how you can track and bring in a lot of the field knowledge up front to really get your spools down and have a much better fabrication. I'm Travis Althouse. I work with Revizto. I am our MEP fabrication or our MEP customer success guy or guru, I guess. I come from a fabrication background. I also had a few years in design engineering on the MEP side. So when I started using Revizto, it really helped me out. We also have Brett Settles on the call. He's our global customer success specialist. He's going to help out with QA, QC throughout this webinar. So first and foremost, in my eyes, the keys to successful fabrication are going to be efficient and effective spooling, using a software, usually some sort of add-in. And with that, I mean having stuff your field guys like to see. Like I know in a big way, putting equipment into a spool could be detrimental to the end product. So having a good add-in to help you kind of communicate back and forth and be able to get that right up front is huge. With that, field knowledge in the design process up front is everything. They're the guys building it. I don't know why you'd want to bring them in all the way at the end and have them try to install when they could kind of help define it up front. Also learning lessons throughout the whole thing and actually being able to report back what you did wrong to do better next time is crucial. And then also, of course, the ability to pivot to real world conditions whenever things change and you have to change what you're doing right off the bat, or maybe they're putting the walls up in a different area and now you have to move over to this other place. Revizto really lets you be able to actually kind of respond to that in a constructive way. And last but not least, on-time delivery. Nothing's worse than spooling something out 3 months in advance and then having the whole system change because a pump changed or something else and having to redo everything. So Revizto lets you really see that coming and you can actually communicate, hey, this submittal changed. Let's hold off on this. Let's hold off on doing this next step, you know. So first and foremost, the spooling technique that I would always use involved, like I said, an add-in. In Revit, I used Evolve as one of the softwares, and I also used Victaulic pretty heavily. So you can actually just grab and define your own spools, and then it generates, it's not going to be perfect, but it'll generate your sheets for you. So you don't really have to, you don't need a detailer kind of tagging everything, dimensioning everything, and also pivoting to real world conditions is a big thing here because now you can just rerun your spools in an add-in. And with that, I'm actually going to just jump right in and kind of show where I would start out with defining spools and whatnot, because the biggest thing is getting as much input up front as possible. Like in my situation, there was a lot of times where there was a logistical problem or something else that I didn't necessarily know about that I needed the field guy to make me aware of. Like in one particular project, there was we had any spools that were under 9 feet could actually go up a man lift for free. You just use the lift in the building. Anything over 9 feet required a crane for $6,000 a day. So it's like, why let the designer design the whole penthouse and then come back and talk about the logistics when you could just have that foreman or that PM in there up front and they already know, and maybe not necessarily all the way up front, totally in front of design, but at least before you fabricate, at least before you put in the time and effort in the fab shop, because that's where the money actually starts to come into play. And that's when if you mess things up, they're actually costly. They're not a few $100 anymore. You're throwing stuff away at that point. So here you have, this is a basic little mechanical fit out in Revizto. And you can see the key for me, first and foremost, was pushing these are my spool colors. So each of these colors represents a prefabricated spool piece. And a big thing that we were having issues with was not being able to see when submittals were ready, or not being able to kind of respond when a submittal got flipped out. And then, so we had serious issues because you have all this would be prefabricated with all these threadlets and everything else. And if this changes down here, this gets thrown away. So first and foremost, we were able to, I'll turn my pins on here. So you could put in stamps here, and actually I named them SUB for submittal, real simple. And as you can see, the green ones mean they're approved. Red means it's not approved. So quickly and easily, our designers can see, hey, can I go with this? Like, can I get into the P&ID and actually start laying out these threadlets? Can I start cutting this spool up? Can I, and you can actually, again, have right on time stuff. Instead of doing all of this a year before you start building, do it a couple months before you're ready to fabricate. Maybe put some placeholders in, but don't spend all that time detailing it till you know it's ready to go. So that would be step one. And for sake of understanding, at the point that I would push this project out in the field, it would look something more like this. So I would push it out with just basic everything one color. So now I can get my foreman in here, and he can kind of look around at stuff. He can kind of start planning his work actually in 3D. And in this one, I left my mechanical equipment with colors so they can check the placement of all that stuff. Because again, right here's a big thing, like that might not open into that T. You know, it depends on what manufacturer and everything else if these butterfly valves are going to actually operate. So right up front, you might want the, someone might check this and say, hey, these need to be aligned. So before you do anything, and this is, I'm doing this on PC, but this is the exact same workflow on the iPad. So you can give an iPad pencil to somebody and they can just do this as if they're marking on paper, you know. Line valves. So now I can, so now I have step one checked right there. He's going to like his valve placement, and now we're not going to have to cut those spools out in the field. But to further that, then they can actually come in here and take their iPad pencil and say, this is what they know this is approved, and say this is the area they want to work on next week. And they have the space for it. They've talked to the other contractors. So they can come in here and make an issue and actually say, spool this and give a date. Let's say we're going to go 2 weeks out. So like 10/22/2019. And then they can just grab their iPad pencil and kind of predefine these spools for us. So that instead of the designer guessing, they can actually come in here. Oops, changed that a little too early. So they with the iPad pencil, you can actually just change the color and keep drawing these as if they're lines. You can grab this little pencil button. So it's really nice to do on site. But it's nice because now you can make these predefined spools so that you have an actual starting point, you know. So we're going to do that, and then let's say like to that elbow. And then I'm going to hit done, and that's going to make an action item. So that is actually going to go, you can assign it to your BIM manager, you can assign it to your fabrication. Maybe you want your fab manager to check it or whatever. But this actually gives us a starting point now for BIM to cut this up. And then ultimately, I'm going to flip back because I already cut these up in Revit for sake of time. But now you can come back and I can re-export this into Revizto, and I have all my spools. And you can see as a designer, I spooled it differently than the foreman wanted. And mostly because, again, another valuable thing with field knowledge is these welds are a lot more expensive than these welds. Now these are Vic couplings, so it doesn't really matter. But if that were a weld, this is about 3 times as much as one of these. Just in time and labor and everything else, they have to go over this a lot more time. So again, having that field guy in there checking that up front, we could have just saved ourselves like 150 bucks in welding time alone on one mistake, you know. Same here. There's some more horizontal ones. But that's kind of step one. That is how you could easily tell your designer how you want these cut up. And then a big key to this also is that Revizto allows you to have all your 2D details and everything, as so long as you're doing them in Revit, these details are smart. So like there's a lot of value looking at this as opposed to the model. And there's also a lot of value looking at the model as opposed to this. So you can put them together with Revizto. And now I can kind of overlay this, and I could detach the sheet and kind of put it in the middle of what's going on here. So now I got a nice little cut up view with my sheet 2D overlaid with all the details, so that anybody that likes working in 2D can keep with that, but they can also come in here, because once you start doing this, instead of looking at this detail, you're going to quickly realize, since I have this point cloud in, that's where you're going to lose a bunch of money. Like, somebody messed up, and if you already have your sleeves in the building, this needs to be a serious conversation, because you're going to have to offset this pipe somewhere up here, and you might as well get to it before you start doing any of this detailing, you know. So again, having the point clouds, having kind of, instead of being one-dimensional, you're literally two-dimensional, three-dimensional here. So it makes it really nice to get in front of stuff that's going to happen in the field. And with that, you can also come in here. I could just hit this issue tracker button and say, like, say I just found those are going to be an issue. Say this needs to be a 14-inch. Like, you could do all this right on the iPad. And let's just call this issues. So now I have like my problems with the sheet, I have my problems with the model, all in one view that I can send directly to whoever's going to make this happen, whether it's the PM, whether we're keeping BIM out of it. If we're going to fix this in the field, assign this to your foreman. Usually in my case, it'd always be best to assign the PM, just because they're the ones kind of making stuff happen and they're in the middle. So they'll make sure if it needs to go to BIM, it'll go to BIM. If it needs to go to the field leader, it's going to go to them. But now you have an actual cut up thing that you can actually go through here and see everything. So, and you can switch back and forth. So here's one that I made earlier with spool this. And when I turn my markups on, you can actually see how he wanted it spooled. And then when I click this, I go right back over to that, and I can switch between markups and actually like being able to move around this. So again, it really leverages those field guys and their knowledge and the stuff that they understand that's going on in the field that a BIM guy might not. Like, a BIM guy might just ship this over to make that work, but you already have those sleeves in. So using this workflow, you allow your foreman to speak up and say, hey, we got those sleeves in. Instead of messing with moving them over here, it's going to be a lot easier to put an offset in the pipe. But you can make those decisions, and instead of making a $1,000 decision, maybe it's a $200 decision. So that's a little bit of the overlay feature. We also, there's a heat exchanger detail here. This was a big one for me, trying to understand the engineering, like an engineer's detail on pieces of equipment compared to what we did. Like, sometimes the engineers just flat out aren't right with how they have stuff in and out. So this kind of allows you to actually throw what they think is right over top of your actual model. So if you did change anything, you can check it. You can also see like the height and everything else. And you can actually see, sometimes you can see like if a pad was poured wrong, if you're using point clouds, you'll be able to see there'll be a little inch here, which obviously means you're going to need to move everything up, you know? So again, using this, it's another layer of catching stuff. So instead of having all these be an inch low because there's or I guess it'd be an inch high, because usually these pads are like 2 3/4 inch. They're not actually 3 inch. So you'd almost always get this wrong unless you made it, like here they have it 3 1/2. That's actually, so they're 3 1/2 because of nominal lumber. And usually engineers will make those 4-inch pads, which just makes you wrong every single time. So again, it's just another layer of kind of checking yourself. And you can always save this off and say, looks good, let's spool this, you know. Or even better, the one that the engineer or that the PM made earlier. Let me get back to my issue tracker here. So this one right here that my PM made, now we can actually track this. So if I'm spooling it, I can say, yeah, it's in progress or it's done. And then you can actually comment on it and everything else. So maybe I can't get to this until next week. But it's a lot more real world communication. So now if that's what he was planning on doing next week and you can't get to it next week, now maybe he's got to pick something else. There's got to be some more low hanging fruit or something to keep his guys busy till BIM can get to this. And same goes for overlaying floor plans. If you have guys that like to check what they're doing in 2D still before they do it in 3D, you can overlay your floor plans, and then you can set them up with a view like this where they can actually come in and give that a second to render. So they can come in here and kind of look at it the way they're used to seeing things with the model underneath. So you can see there's like the engineer's drawing of the heat exchanger. So it makes it really nice, full circle for a contractor trying to prefabricate everything and prefabricate it at a high level where you're within a 1/16 of an inch on everything. There's really no reason not to be with this, because if you see anything, you can just always hit this button. This button is always here to help. It's always there to help you communicate anything that you might find. So that's a lot of the keys to fabrication for me up front. And a lot of it goes with getting these colors out into the field so they can see how stuff's cut up. So in my experience, it was pretty awesome. They started saying, I want the purple, the orange, and the yellow by next Monday. So instead of us like marking up this 2D drawing and having all kinds of people's input, it's just quick and easy. You can hit this and say, or they can even grab their pencil and just circle the ones they want after you have this cut up. So let's say these are the ones he wants to install next week. So now you can set that as like, you can even say next week, because there's always a timestamp. So, and then you create an action item that somebody can actually act on. You can double click this and be able to switch right back into Revit to be able to create this spool differently or move it any way you might need to. And then with that, a big thing too, like right here, these are the same color. So that's a red flag to me. So instead of going to BIM and waiting for BIM to get around to getting an answer, we can actually double click on each of these parts, and you have all of your Kobe data directly from Revit readily available. So anything and everything you can imagine, especially if any of you guys have been working heavily in Revit, you understand how easy it is to add parameters and how to manipulate parameters and kind of do some really cool stuff, like calculations and everything else right in your parameters. So Revizto brings all that in and reads it. But most importantly, a lot of people are trying to get paperless. This method allows you to have your assembly name right there. So that one's CHWR221. I'm guessing this one is the same color because it ends with 1, and I filtered by everything that ends with 1. Let's see. But long story short, you can actually get to a paperless version. So the coupling is part of 221 also. It's going to be this one that's a different spool. So you can see that's VHCHWR01. And a lot of people are already doing this in 2D, but as you can see, you're not going to be able to show the colors and whatnot on like these spools because they're vertical. You can't show that in 2D. So now you can actually grab all that information and see it quickly with your own eyes. And then you can, like I said, you can actually, if they're getting ordered by purple and orange and everything, they could just assign this view to the apprentice or whoever's actually installing it and say, here are the ones that should be on that truck, you know? So it's really nice. And if they have any questions, they can double click and pretty much get any information they want, which is usually that right there. Or if they want the type of insulation on it, that's in here. If they want anything, the height that it is off the floor is going to be in here. So it's really nice. It lets you actually accomplish that paperless workflow. The next step of fabrication and having great success, and one that's a big struggle for a lot of people, is tracking where it's actually at. So it's cool to do all of this on the computer and everything, but how are you supposed to know as the BIM guy what is installed? How do I know where anything is? I don't know for the most part if they made this without going through my Revizto. And once you get people using Revizto, then you can go through Revizto and kind of pinpoint where stuff's at. But say you have a guy not using Revizto, how do you even start to track any of this? Well, so Revizto also allows you to put all your sheets in here, and these are a bunch of spool sheets, and it's really nice because you can actually go through these one by one. And this is a Victaulic data set. I definitely would never put valves in my spools just because there's too much room for error, which most of these have valves in the spools. But you can see, you can kind of just flip through all of these. You can actually like overlay these. If there's like a big question, I can overlay this, cut it down to where that spool is. And then now I can just kind of drop the sheet off there. And now we can look at real world what that spool is real quick and easy without paper. So you could just imagine if you're handing these 2D sheets off to an apprentice or something, and they don't necessarily know where this is located, like there's not very much information to show anything about that. You can just hit this and you can find where that's located quick and easy. So with that, I'm going to open up one that hasn't been marked on yet, and that's a terrible spool. Again, this is one that somebody would be like, why are you sending me out a spool that's a 3'1" and 1/16 inch piece of pipe? But they got a couple of them in here. So here's one. We're going to use this. So the first step of tracking, I kind of look at it as two phases. So you have a QA/QC phase where you're actually checking. Well, this is a good example. So right here, something went wrong with this drawing. The tag cut off on the butterfly valve. Now, in a big way, when you print these drawings out, what happens is that goes out to the field or the fab shop, and they're like, I don't know what this is supposed to be. They send it back to BIM, and then BIM holds the whole process up because they're too busy to circle back and put a number on that. It takes no time, but opening up a project, doing all of that stuff, like it takes time, and sometimes BIM departments just don't have it. So what I suggest with a QA/QC system is coming in and having your PM kind of check for stuff like that. So your PM's going to come in here, and first he's going to make a stamp down here by the fab number, and then that means he's looking at it. Like once he stamps it, that means he's looking at it. Now he can come in here, go into markup mode, and instead of sending this back to BIM, we can use logic to figure out what number this is. So we got an 01, 02, and an 03. It looks like the butterfly valve is 04. So obviously that's 04. He's going to drop that on his stamp as a markup. So now that lives with the document. And I like to make them all like the same color. So I'm going to make this actually green because the PM's stuff is green. So there you can see that's what he found. And then once he's done, so as soon as he puts his stamp on, you can set your stamps up to automatically create basically priority, deadline, the assignee. But most importantly, you're going to want that assignee to go to your fab shop next. So as soon as the PM stamps it, it's going to make an issue for your fab shop foreman, who in this case, in this scenario would be me, since I stamped it as the PM and this is who the assignee is. So the fab shop's going to see like, okay, so that's what he stamped. Fab shop's going to come in and put their stamp on it and start checking things out real quick. And I wanted my fab shop to basically check for goofy dimensions. If there was any questions on the material takeoff list here, that's what I wanted my fab shop looking for. And another big thing, dimensions. There's no dimension on this, probably because there's a butterfly valve in the middle. So this one is bad enough that my fab shop, I would have wanted my fab shop to send it back. But for our intents and purposes, we'll go ahead, and he's gonna probably want, from the face of flange out to the face of pipe out here. So he's gonna want a dimension there. And he's gonna just mark that up. And you can grab a little text box. And this is, I highly recommend doing this on the iPad. It's very easy with an iPad pencil. Cut this down a little. So, like if I had an iPad pencil, I would just write that. I'd just use it like a regular little marker. So he wants that dimension before he builds this. But for our intents and purposes, we're gonna say he approved it and he added the dimension himself, which you can actually. So if you do need that dimension and you're not gonna go back to BIM, you can actually come in here and you can just create a new ruler basically and dimension that yourself. So there, snap to it, and I can make a new issue out of that and just say, here's your dimension. And then that's gonna live on that document as a markup, which I probably shouldn't have put it right in the middle of pipe, but you get the point. So that would conclude our office side of our QA/QC. Then the next step in line, when the shop stamps it, it's going to go over to our field foreman if they need to be involved. And I definitely I had nothing but good things when my field foreman was involved. It was always good talks where we realized something in the field wasn't going the way it was promised in the office, either on my side or a GC. The GCs would definitely get us sometime kind of pivoting which walls were going up and everything else. So the foreman's going to put his stamp on, and now my foreman I had trained to actually use the 3D mode. And yeah, let me get this out of the way here. So the foreman would actually check this. He'd actually click this button, and he would always use this to kind of overlay where that's at. And now we can have a real world talk about that. Immediately, he's going to tell me to face that valve down. I'll tell you that right now. The valve is facing the wrong way. Usually you can fix that in the field, but why not just get it now, you know? But the valve, he's going to be checking for thread-alert locations. With these submittal stamps, I would typically take screenshots of the P&ID so that we could make sure that these were before and after the valves they needed to be and everything. So I would also have a little bit of a review process with the foreman in that regard. But for the most part, this is what they check. And they check and make sure the welds are good. They can get their hands in there. Because by this point, by the time we spooled it, we should have probably checked the P&IDs and all of that. So I'd keep it real simple and have him check this. And everything looks good there, so he's going to say it's good to go. And then the foreman would have to, well, when the foreman stamps it, it's going to go back to the PM. So in this case, Sean is our PM. So now he's going to have this show back up in his issue tracker. So he's going to go down through this list of all the stamps with foreman approval, and So he's going to click right back on his stamp, and all the PM's going to do is say, okay, everybody looked at it. He can check the markups if he wants and make sure like everything's good. And then he's just going to say, it's solved. Go build it. Like, I approve. Go build this thing. So at this point, you know it's released from BIM. It's released from the office. It's going to the fab shop to be built. No more changes. Pencils down. And when he does that, he's going to go ahead and pass it back over to the. He's going to pass it back over to the shop foreman. So then the shop foreman can come in here, and he's going to see that there's stamps on all of it, and he's same thing. He's going to kind of look at it, and it's at this point that he's going to say, okay, the PM approved it. Everybody's on here, and he's going to come up here and actually print this. So you're doing drawings exactly on time. And if you're doing your markups in Revizto, like I did here, you can print with the markups on it. So instead of sending this back to BIM, we can totally bypass BIM. We got all the information we needed without ever going back to Revit, without ever going back to BIM. We can just push through and build this thing. So the shop's going to print it, and then basically as soon as that's built, or as soon as he prints it, would be the best time to come in here, and he's going to mark his as solved. So that means like definitely pencils down now. It's probably on the truck out to the shop, and if you're like, or out to the job site, and if you're looking for where spools are as a BIM guy or whatever, this makes it really easy to come through here, and I can click through these and quickly see, like, I can look at that and say, the shop built it. It's on its way to the site, you know, instead of guessing where spool 227 is. I can come in here and see, like, it's the foreman, it's in the foreman's hands. So if the foreman hasn't got it yet, call the shop and say, when did you ship this spool out? But you can actually locate your spools quickly and easily that way. And then last but not least, the foreman is going to get the spool. He's going to get his drawing. And at this point, we did have 11x17s attached to each of our spools, just because some people were really used to working that way. It makes delegation really easy to be able to just tape an 11x17 to the side of a spool, or give a stack with like a truckload. But at this point, the foreman is going to hand that drawing off. The apprentice is going to go build it. Then the apprentice comes back with basically time that it took to build that and everything else. And when the foreman goes through and does his guys' time cards and everything, he's going to stamp this so we know it's built, or he's going to mark it as solved. So now if I come in here and look at this and they're all green, I know it's all solved. And so circling back to some of the keys to successful fabrication. So let's say every single spool had the shop foreman marking this up. And I noticed that as a PM or as a BIM guy or whoever, or as a proactive shop foreman, I'm going to come in here, and we need to figure this out. So I'm going to put a lessons learned tag on this. So now at the end of the project, any repetitive issues or anything you have, you can actually circle back and have a direct conversation about it. Like, okay, guys, why do we need this dimension? How can we do it better? Then instead of just telling your BIM guys, hey, you guys are terrible, you're always messing stuff up, you can actually say, hey, I need this dimension because I'm pulling a tape off of this to this, and then I'm scoring it and I'm cutting it, and I'm relying on that weld gap that Revit or Victolic or any software you're using is putting in. So that's really nice. But the big key to all of this is, once you get this practiced, you can click this little button up here, and this is our reporting area. So here you can see, these are a bunch of reports that I made. And you can see I basically have one for each step of that process. So I have 6 reports, and or I guess I have 5 in here that are going to pertain to this. But so I have a couple of these downloaded. I'm going to open them up. So like these ones are for constructability review. So constructability review is in your QA/QC process. That's when the foreman is actually checking, is this constructible? So I can quickly make a report that's going to if you stamp it in the right place, it's going to show your actual fabrication number. It's going to show the ID in Revizto. If there's any comments or anything else, it's going to add those. But basically anything with that shop stamp in that status, in open status, is considered in constructability review. So now I can have a whole list of everything like that. And to make those, you just, here, I'll open one up. So you use like basic logic like you would use in Revit to set these up. It's really simple. So I did stamp abbreviation is PM. So as long as it has a PM stamp, then they're going to be ready for fab review. And I think it should be open also. But it's really easy to make your reports, and then you can send them out to your team real quick and easy each day by just clicking here. So now I'm going to get an email, and you can just download these directly. And then the really cool thing about this is if you're in a meeting and say, hey, I remember something goofy about this, or like maybe we want to check, why do we only have 3 spools in this report that are being built? Like, why are we slacking? Maybe they're super difficult spools. So now these reports are live and you can click on this. Yeah, that's a pretty difficult spool. So maybe that's why we only have 3 going out this week, you know, but you can quickly go back and forth in between those and Revizto, which makes it nice. I think I clicked on the same one, but it'll go right through them. So you can check, and then everything, you can also go in there, and if there were markups on this, you can actually see all the markups and everything else. So it makes it really nice for those Monday morning progress meetings to be able to say where you're at. Now, one even better than that is actually making dashboards. So you can kind of do some of the same informational sorting in a dashboard. And this one is not set up with my QA/QC process, but you could set it up the same way. And then maybe you'd have 6 of these, and you'd want them to stay pretty much, you'd want them to stay front loaded as much as possible. You know, you'd want most of them for fabrication review, so that you know your guys are being fed work constantly. If the front end, if the PM's not approving stamps enough or not approving spools enough, you're probably not building as much as you could be. So it makes it really nice to quickly digest a lot of this information that you're creating through the whole process. I think that pretty much sums up a lot of how we were using and how I would use Revizto to really do a solid full circle flow of work. This whole thing, the importance of this whole thing is that you got a lot of BIM guys that, like, as fast as technology is changing, they don't know how to build. You know, I always go by it's a lot easier for a builder to learn software than it is for someone who knows software to learn how to build. So this way, it's more, I mean, it's geared towards making a good build, but it's more so geared towards teaching those guys that don't know how to build. Because it's cool to have one expert that knows how to build, but in a lot of situations, they don't have time to teach everyone. So in this method, you actually get a whole room full of BIM guys that understand what they're doing and why. And in my experience, once I started learning that, I was a lot more excited to work. I was a lot more proactive in identifying possible issues. And it just, the BIM guy is involved from start to finish. So why not, like, try to cater as much knowledge to them as possible? Because in the end, you're only going to have a better product. This doesn't take a lot of time to execute. And a lot of people right now, they don't necessarily have a method of tracking. So you go from having nothing to having something, and you can actually report on it. And then, like I said, you can circle back and have lessons learned. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions that anybody might have, or anything of that nature.
Thanks, Travis. That was awesome.
Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, so as Travis was saying, we're going to go ahead and keep the webinar open for about 5 minutes, handle any Q&A that may be coming through. And if we don't have any questions, we'll go ahead and let everyone go about their day. We've had some questions in the webinar chat. It looks like most of those I've been able to get to. But if anyone has any questions, we'll be hanging out for about 5 minutes. And if we don't get any questions, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. And for anyone that's taking off right now, thank you very much for joining us. And we hope to see you on our next webinar. All right, looks like we have one question here. So, are these capabilities documented online or in a user manual? So, a lot of the tools that are used to create this workflow are documented, but the workflow itself is not documented at the moment. Now, that is every year on the 1st of the year, we release a new implementation guide. And this year, what we hope to do is include some of these workflows in the implementation guide wrapped around fabrication, general contractors, AE design firms. And we hope to unleash some of that at the beginning of 2020.
Yeah, for sure. And we do have a really organized YouTube that is, I'm very impressed by everything. I do have a couple of videos here. There's a little quicker one that flies through some of this stuff. And then there's one that digs into it a little bit more. But as Brett said, it's not really any special tools or anything. It's more of like a way of thinking. And so the key is you just like know what you're going after. And then as new things come out with Revizto and everything else, you try to implement it. But the key for me was always continue with the madness. You always, whatever you implement up front, you want to kind of continue with that. So these are good like starting points of where to get to like the very front end. I did show how to get the spool. There's a little trick to get the spool colors into Revit or into Revizto. So this one goes over that a little bit more. And I did actually cut out, I showed all the topics and where you can find all this stuff in this video. So, and that's just on our YouTube page.
Now, some of the other questions we have in here. So Michael and Jessica both asked, can we get the recording? So anyone that registered for the webinar will receive the recording as soon as it's available. So now Graham, hi Graham, it's been a while since I talked to you, but Graham asked, any mechanism in Revizto tying into material management, such as tracking of spools, material, etc. So right now it's all based around, we do display the material in the metadata, but we don't have any tools around the material management. So no QTO, nothing like that. It's all based around the visual coordination and communication aspect of it. So the tracking of spools is something that is done via the process and the stamping process that Travis has done here. A little bit different than what you would see in products like K-Track or Stratus or any of those types of tools that you may be using. It's really about that communication and education from the field to the office, as well as streamlining that data and reducing bottlenecks. I don't know if there will be any future tools wrapped around material management specifically. However, it's definitely not out of the question. It's just something that is not on the current development plan.
Now you can, with that, you can actually bring in your quantity takeoffs into Revizto and stuff, and you can have it live in your 2D document area here. Like you can make one specifically that's like your quantity takeoffs or your materials. And then again, you can use Revizto to kind of chat about that and what's needed. And like a big situation we had was when the buyout came, like if you are going to prefab everything and you drew it in Victaulic pipe, you got to buy Victaulic pipe. You can't buy the off-brand Victaulic because the elbows are going to be different and everything else. So you can use this to still communicate about materials, but not necessarily track. You could create a system like I did with stamps and whatnot, I'm sure, depending on how you guys operate. But
Now, one thing I will say on top of that is we do have a release coming at the beginning of 2020, which is our 5.0 release. And there is going to be a lot of extended tools based around object metadata, the ability to report on objects. So while there may not be anything to calculate QTO, if that is part of your metadata, there will be reporting functions that can assist with that. But that is something that we're looking towards definitely into 2020.
I see there's a question about the interaction with ProCore. I would love to show that, but it's quite extensive. We do have some videos on that as well, but like just super quick, we have a docs section. So I believe these ones are tied to Box. So these actually live in Box, and we just connected them to Revizto. So your exports, now you're not exporting your sheet every time. So it makes your exports a lot faster. With the ProCore one specifically, you'll have the option to go into issue tracker and you can elevate these to RFIs. And I don't have this project tied to the ProCore integration, but you can actually, so if this ends up having an RFI, if this needs to be an RFI, you can literally click a little button that says elevate to RFI and it'll open up your ProCore panel, and then you can write an RFI right from there. And it'll have a little logo so you know it's tied to something.
Yeah, Travis is explaining there are actually two integrations that we have with ProCore. One with the ProCore documents, which acts much like the BIM 360 or the Box integration. And then we also have the RFI workflow, which allows you to take Revizto issues all the way to RFI and ProCore. One of the questions from Lehan is, will the overlays still work when PDFs are in ProCore? That's actually a really good question, and the answer is yes. So what we do is we have a way to export the viewport data that lives on your sheets. That viewport data will then be assigned to the PDFs or that you bring in from a document management system, and we can complete the whole automatic overlay of the construction documents to the model in Revizto via that integration. So the overlays still do work with some of the tools that we have in there. So absolutely yes. Because Travis, if you go to 2D real quick, are these sheets connected to Box?
Yeah, they are.
So go to the sheet list. Okay, never mind. You were right there. So these are not connected right now, but if you notice that there's a little sheet icon next to each one of these sheets, if they are connected to ProCore, BIM 360, or Box, you will be able to identify that in a logo, but the functionality of Revizto will not change using that integration.
Yeah, and it makes it nice for if you have a massive sheet set and you're exporting daily, it cuts your export time down substantially.
All right, everyone. Well, it looks like we've gotten through the questions here. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and end the webinar. Now, just so that everyone knows, and kind of back to that first question, or that one question about the recording, everyone that registered for this webinar will receive the recording. And after the recording has gone out, we will also post to our YouTube page. So there will be multiple places where you can access this webinar and get this information. And we're looking to document this workflow whenever we release our implementation guide for 2020. So there should be a lot of places to get this information moving forward. And if you're interested in utilizing Travis on your project or inside of your company, his job is to take care of our MEP fabrication and engineering clients. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to both Travis and I, as well as your local sales representative. And we can make sure that you guys have all the tools you need to be successful with Revizto. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Feel free to reach out.
Have a good day. Thank you.